So, I got a confession though. Like how I come up with like these clever ways to like introduce the episode.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Well, like, just sometimes I get some like fears inside that like I might say something stupid.
Well, hopefully you won't have to talk about too many stupid things today.
So yeah, hey, welcome back everybody to the best music podcast on this side of the Mississippi, hosted by two dashingly good-looking men who share the same middle name. My name is Ryan James Kearns.
And my name is Matthew James Durzik.
And this podcast is called Hey, Listen to This. And if you are new here, first of all, welcome. It's fun here. We eat cookies and we talk about music and give our thoughts about it. But if you're not familiar with what we do here, other than eat cookies and talk about music, like essentially every week me and Matt just take turns picking albums that we're gonna talk about track by track. It could be for a couple different reasons of like why we're bringing the album to the table. So like for example, Matt, what was the album that we discussed last week?
Last week we discussed Tower of Power by Tower of Power, a bit more of a funk R&B musing from 1973. One that I generally liked, but at the same time felt was holding itself back a little bit. And it was something that was sort of more in my wheelhouse of like older music and music of a different era. And then this week we are going into very much not that.
So this week we are hopping on that bandwagon, that Brat bandwagon, as it well, I don't know if it's actually officially called that, but I digress. So this week we are talking about what I would say is probably the album of the summer. It's Brat by Charli XCX. And the reason why I'm bringing this to the table is that, one of my favorite music YouTubers, Anthony Fantano, he gave this album a 10 out of 10. So, like, anytime that he gives an album a 10 out of 10, it definitely catches my eye, and it definitely elevates an album to new status. So, yeah, I figured, I listened to the album once after he gave it a 10 out of 10. I'm like, oh, yeah, hey, this is a good album. And then I eventually found, it would be a good episode for us to, take on this album because, let's face it, this kind of music is not really in any of our wheelhouses. I'm not listening to hyper-pop rave music. Are you, Matt?
No, I'm not. This is going to be an interesting experience going over this album because, for the most part, this kind of music is nowhere near my wheelhouse. I mean, it's not that I don't like dance music or can't respect club, rave type music, but is it my go-to? Not in the slightest.
So, for those of you who came to this episode and are like, what is a Charli XCX? First of all, welcome. Welcome to the world. How was that coma that you've been experiencing for the past, 10 years? Maybe 12 years. But secondly, just a quick blurb of, how she, rose to prominence. Is her first, emergence onto the music scene was back in 2012, where she was collaborating with the duo Icona Pop. I might be mispronouncing that, I don't care. But the song is I Love It, that really helped make a name for Charli XCX. And then over the next couple of years, she collaborated with different artists like Iggy Azalea, where she contributed to the hook and the bridge of the song Fancy. And then eventually, in that same year, she released her first solo top 10 single, which was Boom Clap. And then after that, she's basically kind of been kind of famous, but not really. Like, if people say it, like, over the next, like, 10 years, if people would have said, oh, hey, yeah, Charlie XCX, like, it's kind of like that artist that you always see in, like, a producer role or a collaborator role or a featured artist. And, like, if her music would come on the radio, it would be like, oh, hey, this is cool, but it's not on the level of, like, a Taylor Swift or a Beyonce, not on, like, that superstardom.
Yeah, and you're right about that. Sort of that always the bridesmaid, never the bride type of mentality. I had forgot about I Love It, I remember I Love It, but I forgot that it was her. Like, so that just kind of plays into your thought of, oh, right, that, yeah, okay. But at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, she has been garnering critical acclaim since then. Again, sort of flying under the superstar radar, but definitely getting high marks from critics in the industry, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and the she caught my attention because of, again, I'm a huge fan of the Needle Drop. Anthony Fantano's helped me, form opinions about music over the years. And he's given, like, really positive ratings and reviews for a couple of her albums. And if I'm not mistaken, I think one of her albums, I think it's Charlie, that was released back in 2019, ended up being one of his albums the album of the year for Anthony. And I'm going to be honest with you, like, man, I listened to that album, I'm like, at the time, I mean, I'd be curious to, like, rewind to a time before the pandemic and see if, like, if I can appreciate that album maybe a little bit more, because I'm going to be honest with you, whenever I spun that album, it wasn't really my cup of tea. So, whenever you chose between the two options that we were going to cover, Brat by Charlie here, I was very excited, man.
Yeah, I was too, because, again, anytime someone gives that kind of praise, like you mentioned, it's interesting to figure out, what it is they were talking about, and, in our opinions, if they were right about that or not. So, we'll be seeing if Mr. Fantano's 10 holds up today.
Yeah, or, I mean, maybe we can give it a 0 out of 10. I mean, that would be incredibly bold of a statement here.
It would be, but I'm just going to spoil that right now. We're not going to do that. Or at least I'm not going to.
Yeah. All right, so the opening track off of Brat is 360. And I really liked how this kicked off the album. Like, it's not really as, like, brash and, like, in your face as compared to, like, many of the tracks that are that you can find throughout the whole album. But it's a light, like, little club anthem, and it kind of plays into the narrative of, like, where Charlie is at this moment with, releasing such a critically acclaimed album. Well, I mean, at the time she was recording this, but, like, she was still like, hey, I'm kind of famous, and, like, I want to hear my music, but, there's also this other music, and the other nods that Charlie gives in the opening track here are to people that, like, have helped her along the way, whether it be, like, friends, family, collaborators. I thought that was a nice touch. Instrumentally, like, I really dug just that, that bassy layer that acts as the foundation for everything, man. And, like, another really interesting thing that I don't know, like, this might speak to, like, how far I've come as, like, a music reviewer. The little, like, splurts of, like, random noise in the background in this track here, like, the little, like, faint, like, synth notes that are, like, kind of scratchy, I found to be very interesting. Like, I was fixated upon it. It's not really anything of note, but it was an interesting choice. But overall, like, like, this song is a really good time. I loved the chorus was really tight. It's not a big chorus, but the flow and the impact of, like, the lines, when you're in the mirror, do you like what you see? When you're in the mirror, you're just looking at me. And, overall, it's a really good time.
I agree. I think this is a very solid, very good album opener. I, like you, dug that minimalist keyboard beat. I didn't pick up too much on the little synth notes that you were talking about, like the little scratches. I may have to go back and listen to it in order to find that out. Um, Lyrically, this song is very much in tone with the name of the album, Brat, because it's a very bratty track. But at the same time, I think this is one of those rare songs, or at least one of the first ones I've seen in a while, where I think watching the music video would actually help. Because I didn't do that the first time. On the first listen, I just listened to the tracks as they were while reading the lyrics. But the second time I actually watched the video as part of it, and I think it does a good job of shaping the idea of what Charlie's sort of purporting in this song. Like, because you would listen to it and think, okay, is she being serious about this or not? And it really is on the fringe of sort of a self-parody or a self-referential. Because you watch the video, there's dudes falling down on treadmills. She's, like, exercising while trying to drink wine. A lot of it is very comical. There's just cars piled up everywhere just for the sake of being cool. It's pretty funny. But at the same time, there is that sort of element of, hey, there is actually a little bit of danger in what we're doing, and maybe we don't care about that or don't realize it. So, yeah, I like this song too. Not my top three, but definitely a good starting point to the album.
A couple other notes that I'm gonna, bring to the table here is like the way that the track begins, man, with lyrics saying, "I went my own way and I made it. I'm your favorite reference, baby." Like, so this album is called Brat, and like you take a look at the album cover, and it's just like that pixelated title, and everything's kind of like basically in your face, and like you kind of alluded to with the music video, this is Charli just having fun with everything. She's not taking herself too seriously, but if you kind of scratch the surface a little bit, there's plenty enough there that you can see where Charli's mental state is at. Not maybe so much with this track here, because again, this track is basically like her taking a victory lap and her being like, hey, I see that crown, I'm gonna grab it, and hey, I'm your favorite reference, baby. But again, a note that I'm going to make that it's going to be true for a lot of the tracks here. This track here knows what it's doing, and it just gets out of the way after it makes its point. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's just like, hey, we need to make this statement. No excess fat on the bone here, and just get on with the day.
You're absolutely right, and I'm probably going to say that quite a few times myself, because there is an intelligence to this album that we're gonna dig deeper into as we go along.
So the next track
is called Club Classics, and lo and behold, just what we were talking about. This is a track that knows exactly what it's doing. It's a bit more of a rave dance track, and it very much sounds like a rave dance track. But yet, there's still a little bit of intelligence in there, because she's name dropping all these different producers or names in the rave scene that she's talking about. And again, that doesn't come unless you know a little bit of what you're coming from. These influences of her pop, these influences of her sort of dance vibes, and the influences of her party life. She's like, oh yeah, I know this track, and while other people may not know it, she's like, oh, I want to dance to this, I want to dance to that, I want to dance to this. And again, the beat itself is pretty much spot on as far as a rave track. So I really don't have a whole lot of notes about this track. It knows exactly what it's doing. It's a rave track that has read a few books and has listened to a few tracks and read a few liner notes. It's good, not in my top three.
So I had the same exact, well, not note for note, but my very first note on this track, man, is rave music, baby. But in all seriousness, it's interesting that we are, taking a look at this album as a whole, because this song specifically, this is the most dance music centric track that we've ever discussed on this show before. Like, and I'm going to be honest with you, like, maybe I will have to do some introspection throughout when we get to a couple of the tracks later on. But, like, I would say that, again, like, this might be the most dancey kind of track that we have off the whole album. My thoughts on the track itself, it's a good time. Did not land in my top 3. I kind of like it a little bit less than 360 if you want to, like, kind of put a hierarchy in there. But this is an absolutely good time. The one thing that I really kind of loved about this is this, like, for lack of a better descriptor for like the noise that I heard in this track, it was almost kind of like a flubber techno noise that is featured on a couple of points here. Like, you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So you get that. Like you said, the references to, AG, George, Sophie, and Hutmo kind of complements the themes that were, given to us in the opening track, 360. So I felt that was a nice nice point in the track there. It's almost just like this is like a two-parter for like an opener, if I'm going to be honest with you. And even later on in the track where, the script is flipped and Charlie's saying she wants to dance to her music, I felt like that was a nice touch. And this is where I'm glad I'm kind of turning off my lyric-centric brain when it comes to reviewing music, because in Club Classics, there's like the moment that where Charlie samples herself saying "right now," and it's over and over and over and over again. I really liked that moment. Like, it was a really cool moment for me. So yeah, 2 tracks in, and I'm managing pretty well. I know that this music is not made for me whatsoever because, like, I've never been to a rave. I've never wanted to dance, but I can really get behind this stuff.
And I will keep my comments about my rave experiences to a very minimum because we're not going to bring up that meme.
Yeah, we don't need to open up that box there.
No, we don't.
So, like, another note that I'm going to just, finish off the discussion here is that the line that goes, "When I go to the club, fuck." Like, I loved how that naturally flowed together, and it, like, club and fuck are kind of like, not the same kind of word, but in the context of the track itself, it's pretty seamless, which is I'll give a nod to Charlie with their execution on that line.
Yeah, again, a lot of this, if not the entirety of this album, flows very well. There are a couple moments where it doesn't. We'll get to those, but you're right. There is a seamlessness to this track that has to be respected.
So, the next track.
The next track is "Sympathy is a Knife."
So, I love this song, man. This song just slaps so hard. It is disgusting. On the surface, it is so simple, like, where you get the, like, the often, used trope in music where you get the dynamic play of, like, soft and loud. But here you get loud and louder dynamics. And the one section where you get the absolutely driving rhythm with the synths and the drum machine, I feel like that contrasts so well with the chorus when everything just gets so big. And at the end, you get the track. At the end of the track, you get those distorted background vocals that only add to such a banger of a track. And even lyrically here, man, like, we go from 360 to Club Classics, which is basically we've walked into a rave with 360, we're at the rave with Club Classics, and now with this track here, Sympathy is a Knife, we get Charlie looking we get a little bit of a different side with her, where she's more insecure, and like, I kind of really like that. I mean, I love the metaphor, like, sympathy being a knife, because, like, hey, people are using that against you, and, like, they actually really don't care, and they're going to twist that to their own, gain. And Yeah, like, lines where she's singing why I want to buy a gun, why I want to shoot myself, violate at war with my dialogue. Yeah, like those lines, like I felt like that, especially when she's like, why I want to buy a gun, why I want to shoot myself. Like, I don't know, like I almost want to compare it to Taylor Swift's I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, but this does it so much better. In terms of like that funny lyrical lines there, and yeah, overall this is a fantastic song, and it has landed in my top 3 at number 2.
So I am right there with you on this. I think this is a fantastic track. And to sort of go off of the Taylor Swift metaphor that you were talking about, and I agree, this song is eons better than I Can Do It With a Broken Heart. You can just envision the situation that she's putting herself in. She's dealing with this heartbreak. She's dealing with all these emotions, and she feels like when I hear her say sympathy is just a knife, it feels like she's saying there's all these emotions that are gonna, be sharp and touch me and cut me deep, and I don't want to feel that, but at the same time, I have no choice but to feel that. The situation that she describes is so descriptive, and I am about descriptive lyrics. I think the beat is very good. I think her voice is very passionate, and it's not often that you get these kind of lyrics on a dance track. You go back to the days of like, Lady Gaga or, late stage J-Lo, and their lyrics were fine. They did the job, but they didn't like have any type of introspection like this. And similarly, like with I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, the performance on that was a little bit haphazard, whereas this is pretty much, just driving and hits every single note perfectly. It's also my top 3, and it is at number 1.
Oh my goodness! So I love it, man. Like, I when we get to my favorite track on this album here, I will discuss the reason why I put this track at number 2 and that other track at number 1. This kind of flirted around with being my top track, to be honest with you. Like, until like I sat down before I called you on Zoom here, I had to figure it out. I'm like, you know what? Nope, this is how I feel, and sticking to my guns. But I'm glad that we share the same at least love and appreciation for this track. So that's always a nice thing. So the next track is I Might Say Something Stupid.
I Might Say Something Stupid. And once again, the lyrics on this track are absolutely fantastic, because once again, it almost feels like, if we're talking about the sequential nature of these songs so far, 360 is basically her getting ready to go to a night out. Club Classics is the night out. Sympathy is a Knife is the point during the night out where she realizes, oh wait, reality does in fact exist, and this feels like the morning after, still trying to cope with that reality. Again, I think her voice sounds very good, and the only complaint about it is that I wish it were a little longer, because it is just kind of a blip where she, talks about her feelings, and then it's like, okay, that's it, like 2 minutes and we're out. And again, you tend to feel her pain through those types of lyrics. You tend to hear the fact that she's like, just to re-enter the party, doors open, but let in, but still outside. I look perfect for the background. I get nervous, sip of the wine. I go so cold because I don't know if I belong here anymore. We were talking earlier about her fame and how she's sort of on the fringes of it and how she's not a superstar. And it feels like she is confronting that right directly on this song. I'm famous, but not quite, but I'm perfect for the background. 1 foot in a normal life. I love those lines. But again, it's so short and so slight, so unfortunately, it will have to be relegated to my number 2 song on the album.
Oh my goodness, I did not see that one coming, man.
No?
No, I mean, like, a lot of the thoughts and opinions that you shared with this track here, I share 100%. Like, the only, like, the lines about, like, famous but not quite, perfect for the background, like no notes, like you captured that perfectly. The only thing that I'm gonna add to the discussion is the use of the auto tune here. Like, it's funny, like, if Ryan from 10 years ago could hear me talk about auto tune now, he would probably slap the crap out of me. um because, like, when autotune first came into, like, popular consciousness of the zeitgeist, as it could be called, I was just like, oh no, this is stupid. Why are people doing this? It sounds dumb. This is dumb, 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 dumb. But here, like, it's used so artfully, artfully and with a purpose. Like, the moment that I really want to highlight here in terms of, like, the use of the autotune and how everything sounds is the moment where she's saying, "I go so cold, I go so cold." Like the way that sounds with her voice and the passion that she's delivering behind that, it hits so well because it genuinely does sound so cold. Like, you can really feel, like, the hopelessness and, like, the existential crisis about, like, the human condition that Charlie is facing here. So yeah, overall, like, for it being, like, such like, I almost want to say this is more of, like, an interlude kind of track. It's probably the best interlude track that we've ever kind of covered in our show here.
I would agree. And it's and you mentioned how auto-tune is so much better now. I don't think that's a knock on your former takes. I mean, because let's be honest, any type of technology like that, whether it's auto-tune or computer technology or the dreaded AI, will always be worse in its infant stages than they are now. So we can look back at, like, the Bed Intruder song or T-Pain and laugh and be like, auto-tune was a fun experiment. But as they've tweaked it over the years, it gets better, and here we are.
So the next track, we are going back into dance mode, man, with Talk Talk. And my thoughts about this track, it's a fun track. Spoiler alert, I don't have a bottom tracks in this whole album here, because there's not one single track that falls below that 7 out of 10 range. If I had to put a track in, like, the lower tier, this would be it, but that's only because it's pretty straightforward and, like, it gets to the point. Like, it's more about vibes and everything, and the vibes are really good. Like, it's very lighthearted and everything like that. The one moment that I would really would want to highlight is, like, the lyrics where she's talking about, like, hey, maybe I should bump into you in the bathroom, and then maybe that's how we can start a conversation. Apparently, that's a true story that Charli has talked about, where, like, before she got together with her current partner, I don't know if it's a fiance or a husband at this rate, but, like, she actually planned on doing that with him, and, like, she actually did bump into him while, like, going to the bathroom. I don't know the exact story from that, but I thought that was a cute moment. But how this track sets the scene. This is, like, the way that I walked away from it, it's more of, like, seeing somebody across the room and, like, admiring them from afar and, like, this is somebody that you've seen at a club, and, in your head you've had conversations with them, but you're not actually had any conversations with them, and you just want that connection. And Charli executes that pretty well. The flow of the chorus with the repetition of, like, the word talk, it's just such a good time, dude. Like, I know, like, I keep saying, like, this track is such a good time, but it is essentially a great dance track.
I agree, and I basically have the same thoughts that you have, which is the lyrics are fine, but it's more about vibes than it is anything else. I wrote in my notes that it has strong early 2010s vibes, which is a good thing, because it just feels like it's a song that you would hear at a club. circa 2010, circa 2011. The chorus is very infectious. But at the same rate, this wasn't a standout track to me. Like it definitely fit into the flow of the album, but it didn't really take anything home like the previous two tracks did, which is fine. Not every track has to be, you don't have to have 12 Bohemian Rhapsodies out of 12 on an album. So yeah, I like this track quite a bit, but it's not a standout. Didn't land in my top three.
Side note, 12 Bohemian Rhapsodies in a single album, I think I would die. Let's be honest.
I don't think the world would be ready for that.
But one other moment that I want to highlight here, and then we can pivot off to Von Dutch. Is the outro where Charlie's saying, hey, talk to me in French, talk to me in Spanish, talk to me in your own made-up language, doesn't matter if I understand it. Like, this is the point where I really want to highlight that Charlie's just, like, hungry for that connection. People can say, like, maybe she's a little horny for that connection, but I feel like she just wants to have that connection of, like, person to person, not, like, body to body, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. I thought that the way she rhymed Spanish with language, or at least attempted to, was a nice touch.
So the next track is Von Dutch, baby. Well, just Von Dutch, not Von Dutch, baby, just Von Dutch.
Yes, Von Dutch, and this is another solid track. I dug the basic beat of it. At first, I thought the very heavy bassy waves in the back were kind of annoying, but on the second listen I was like, actually this is pretty good. It just, again, and goes right on that fringe of, is this overdoing it or underdoing it, but it's doing it. So your enjoyment of this track may depend on what speakers you're using or what output you have. Lyrically, I don't think there's a whole lot to write home about. You talk about the connection of the last track. I think this is sort of more of a manifestation of that. This is more just a basic, I'm your number one. Just sort of a brag track, which is fine. I don't know. And again, I don't know lyrically if this is meant to be self-parody or legit serious, which again, I think does push the interesting aspects of this album to higher lengths, whatever. So basically, I like this track, and also I will say, I don't know if you've seen the music video for this track, but it is bonkers. Like, how many days did that take, and whose idea was that?
So, yeah, I actually did watch that music video last night, so I know exactly what you're talking about. I really like, as weird as it sounds, I really like how it ended, because I'm not sure if you're aware of how the movie Pearl ended, where Mia Goth is just smiling and the director kept rolling, and it's just like, okay, I wonder how long this is gonna go. Like at the very end of the Von Dutch music video, you just have Charlie looking at the camera, riding that baggage carousel thing, and you can tell it's authentically rolling, and I wonder how that would have worked out. But anyways, I digress. I mean, it's an excellent music video. This track here, it's definitely it is a highlight off the it's on the upper tier of the tracks in the album for me. Didn't crack my top three, but I can still go back to this track again and again and again, especially if I want to get into that braggadocious kind of mood. So that it's interesting that you're talking about that thick bassy synth and how that kind of morphs. Again, I'm gonna give myself a pat on the back on how much I'm growing as a music reviewer, because if this was Ryan from, I don't know, 5 months ago, that I would have been like, oh, I just can't get over that. Maybe it's the way that it's used or anything like that, because you mentioned, it all depends on the speaker output that you are, listening to this track on. Well, I've done everything from my Pixel earbuds to my Sony earbuds to, my crappy car stereo. And, I can still get behind it. So, it passes that test for me. But in terms of this track here, other than that thick bassy synth groove that we were really we were talking about. The repetition of "I'm your number one," like how that goes over and over again. That was a really nice touch. It is so good. And in terms of like the other moments in this track, more of the lyrical content, because I feel like here, this is more of like, sympathy is a knife was more of her being like, hey, people are just awful, like, I don't want to share this space with somebody, and like, hey, like, people are just using me. This is her just embracing herself and just be like, hey, you know what, I don't care. I know that you're jealous of me, and it's obvious that I'm your number one. Like, you're obsessing, just confess it, put your hands up. And one of my favorite moments is the savage lines that you hear in the chorus. I'm only just going to highlight one moment here is why you lying? You won't fuck unless he's famous. Do that little dance. Without it, you'd be nameless. It's so obvious I'm your number one. Like that. Oh my goodness. Like, we're back on the back on the trope within our podcast. And this is Charli XCX's Idiot Wind.
I would never have thought about this track like that, and I'm not sure I still do, but I appreciate you bringing that back.
I gotta ride that train whenever it comes a calling, man. So
I get that.
So the next track is Everything Is Romantic, and again, I really like this song. Similar thoughts in terms of like placement within the album's hierarchy, where like this is like on the upper tier, but it did not crack my top three. Still, we're getting into a couple of the tracks that are going to be cracking my top three relatively shortly, because let's face it, we're running out of tracks at one point. But the way that it begins, we're talking about like let me pull up the lyrics, because like the whole concept of everything being romantic is the fact that everything has beauty in it if you think about it, and how it begins with bad tattoos on leather tan skin, Jesus Christ on a plastic sign. You're exploring the contrast of like Jesus Christ on a plastic sign, that's supposed to be something that's beautiful, but bad tattoos on leather tan skin, like that's something that's like not so pretty. Like I love that contrast there. And in terms of the chorus here, like this is the definition of an anti-drop for me. Like it just flows pretty well. And like after that, the next verse, it takes us away from those EDM vibes that like the track began out with, and like it's more centered around the synths laying down chords that build and build and build alongside a whirly noise that you can hear slightly in the background. Overall though, like not again, didn't crack my top three because it was just missing that one little element to like take it over the edge, but I really liked it, man.
I thought it was okay, but if I'm being completely honest, this is my least favorite song on the album. And there are good parts of it. Like I said, I think I do like the little lyrical allegory you mentioned there with sort of the contrast of what beauty is supposed to be. I think the chorus and little like spritz of are nice, but at the same time, I feel like the delivery of lyrics is just a little too haphazard for me, particularly on that second verse that you were just talking about, where everything sort of drops out. And I understand, and there's a couple examples later on in the album that do this a little better, where the beat just sort of completely disappears and you're sort of supposed to find the beat within the lyrics. But the way it was just came across, it felt a little too forced and a little too fast. Like, I 9 times out of 10, I probably couldn't tell you where the beat was on that second verse. And while I don't necessarily think it's required to be there, like, sometimes you can drop back and allow the the vocalist to sort of carry the beat for it. I don't think it does particularly do that on this track. I think the outro is a little bit meh as well. Not a horrible track by any means. Like if I were to listen to this album front to back, I don't think I would skip this song. But at the same time, facts are facts, or at least in this case, my opinions are facts. And I am going to say that this is my least favorite song on the album.
One other moment that I want to highlight here. One of my favorite lines in this track that I'm gonna like maybe help tweak your appreciation of the track. If not, I mean it's okay. I mean opinions are facts. um, but I really like the line about Pompeii being in the distance. Because it adds another layer to this track that saying, hey, destruction is basically kind of around the corner, and we just better appreciate life as we know it before it's gone, because you never know what can happen. So there's beauty in everything, and life is meant to be appreciated. Yeah, I mean, overall, I dug this track. The outro was fine for me. I love the repetition of falling in love and again, falling in love and again. Like you kind of got lost in that little loop there. But yeah, overall, I feel like I'm much higher on this track than you are, evidently. Because I don't believe in putting this in my bottom half. I don't believe in putting any track on this album in my labeling it as a least favorite. And this beats out some of the other tracks off the album.
That's fair. That's fair.
All right, so the next track, man.
The next track is Rewind, and I like this track a whole lot better. I think the lyrics are fantastic, and I do appreciate the. I guess the backstory of this song is that the one, beat that's sampled here is from Sophie, and partners in the past, and now they're not, and I think Sophie's no longer here with us. And I think that adds a nice touch as well. And the way she reminisces about going back to a simpler time, listening to music while painting her toenails. Like, I can very much envision a lot of, like, that is such early 2000s, late 90s vibes that I was like, oh my goodness. Like, this, again, Charli is, speaking from experience, knows exactly what she's talking about. And I really, really like that. This does not crack my top 3, but it really, really is a fantastic track.
So, I love this song, man. It is so fucking good.
Gee, I wonder where it's gonna land with an intro like that.
So, spoiler alert, this is in my top 3. After my, little blurb about the track, I'll let you know where it landed, if it was number 1 or number 3. So, the one thing that really hooked me into this track here is that rewind effect, because I felt like that was so good and used so purposefully, especially when talking about sometimes I just want to rewind and you hear that rewind noise, like that kind of, like, it was something so simple but it blew my mind. And even outside of that context, the bouncy riff that is accompanying along with the hand claps throughout the track, it is so good that it's just not real. And the way that the track begins with the chorus, and then for that transition to into the first verse to be that rewind song, I love that moment. And then even lyrically talking about Charli wanted to go back to a different time when she wasn't so insecure, to days where she didn't overly analyze her face. But nowadays she only eats at good restaurants. But she's only just thinking about her weight. I really love that little sentiment about hey, this is a properly done nostalgic track in terms of hey, I just want to go back to a time when things weren't so crazy. I really dug that. One of my favorite lines here on the whole track is, "I used to never think about Billboard, but now I've started to. But I started thinking again, wondering about whether I think I deserve commercial success. So again, that plays into the narrative that, Charlie is semi-famous, but not quite. Like she's about to break out. And I think with this album, she officially did break out, hopefully, because it's a rather good album. But and the other thing that I'm gonna say is the outro. It really didn't need to be a thing, like, cause you could have just had this whole chorus verse, and just write out the chorus. But I feel like that outro is a nice way to send off the track, where you get a more melodic section. And then you get the beat to kick it back in to send off everything. So can you guess where this landed in my hierarchy? Is it number 1 or number 3?
I'm going to say it's number 1.
It is number 1 with a bullet, man. And, it's just because of that rewind effect and the way that it was used so effectively, accompanied alongside with the lyrical themes of wanting to go back to a simpler time where, life wasn't so complicated, and just that beat and everything, it just works so well for me. So, yeah. Absolutely a banger of a track.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Again, the only reason it's not in my top 3 because I dig a few other tracks a little bit more, and that in itself might be more reflective of the whole idea of having a comfort zone compared to not having a comfort zone. But we'll talk about that later.
So, the next track is "So I," and so I. So this track was probably the most. It was the toughest pill for me to swallow. And the reason why. Are you? So I know Jamie, my wife, has showed you the track "No One Dies from Love" by Tove Lo, right?
Yes.
Okay. So when I did my when I did my initial detailed listing of the whole album, when I came across this track, the chord progression here reminded me so much of "No One Dies from Love" that it was almost completely distracting for me. So this track almost landed in my bottom. It would have been my bottom track. Just because of that fact, because it was completely distracting and I couldn't really escape that. And apparently that's a common theme with some of Charlie's fans. Not the inability to enjoy the track because of the comparison, but a lot of people are picking that up. That being said, though, after a couple more spins of the track, I got over it a bit, and I realized it's not so much of a direct comparison and not a ripoff or anything like that. Just the chord progression's faintly comparable. So, that being said, with this track here, so this is a tribute track that Charlie made. It's a loving tribute track to the recently departed producer Sophie, which Charlie was a frequent collaborator. It almost seems like a mentor-mentee kind of relationship based on how I was reading up on it, because you get different themes of her pushing Charlie and her and Charlie pushing her away and them wanting to be friends. I mean, you get lyrics wish I tried to pull you closer, you pushed me hard, made me focus, your words, brutal, loving, truthful, I was petrified. One thing that I will say that holds the track back from really kind of taking it to the next level is the fact that the lyrical delivery of some of these lines here, they kind of really just seem a little too hollow for my taste, because it's almost your words, brutal, loving, truthful, it doesn't sit well with my ears, even after multiple re-listens of the track. But other than that, and the comparison from "No One Dies to Love," I really did enjoy this track as a complete package. It's not going to creep up into the upper echelon of the album for me in terms of like track placements, in terms of like favorites to least favorites, but it's not a bottom track for me. Overall, it was a decent track.
I agree. It's a decent track. I didn't take a whole lot home with me on it. I think some of the phrasing on the track is a little forced, but I do like the melody of it, and I do like the minimalist background of it. Again, this is one of those tracks I think that fits more into the album, that stands out on its own. So I really don't have anything else to add to what you had to say. Again, I think it's a solid track. And then this is this the one with the piano in it, or was that Rewind?
No, this one was with the piano.
Okay, yeah. The piano on this, I like that piano. I will admit that the comment section, and this is the part where I feel like the line was drawn as far as my cultural understanding of where I am in the pop sphere. Because again, I confession, I watched the songs on YouTube, and all the comment sections, I'm just like, I'm too old for this, man. Like, there are so many things in here I don't understand, and like, again, I think the piano's good. I don't think it's as explosively amazing and mind-blowing as a lot of people were saying it to be. This track's alright. I like it.
One other thing that I'm gonna, highlight on this track, and then we can go over to "A Girl So Confusing," is the change up from the first verse to the second verse. Like the first verse, you get that big nighttime feel, and it's like more, it just seems like hey. This is life as it is. Like, you can kind of picture this being like a New York City kind of song or anything like that. Not like a club song, but like a rooftop kind of song where you're having a conversation with a friend. And then in the second verse, you get the more melancholic feeling. And like that second verse, I really dug because like you get that bare bass. It almost seems to be controlling the feel of everything. So if people are like, ascending to a new plane because of that piano that's in this track here, I would counter that by saying like the bare bass that you hear in the second verse, it's much more impactful for my ears.
I can get behind that. Again, this track again fits into the album just fine. So yeah.
So are you ready to talk about how it's so confusing to be a girl?
I am very much ready to talk about how it's so confusing to be a girl on the track Girl So Confusing. And this track starts off a little iffy, but we were talking before, particularly with Everything Is Romantic, where there are certain parts where it feels like the beat drops before it starts, and then it comes back, and you're like, okay, now it makes sense about how this was supposed to go. The way this track starts is very much that. I was kind of put off by it at first, but then as it progressed and the beat came in, I was like, okay, now I get what this is supposed to be. This flows actually very nicely. And the lyrics on here are great. Because the chorus itself of just, proclaiming how confusing it is to be a girl and dealing with everything, the chorus is fantastic. But seeing things like, because people say we're alike, they say we got the same hair, one day we might make some music, the internet would go crazy, but you might not still want to see me, but you might still want to see me falling over and falling, at least we're closer to being on the same page. You're all about writing poems, but I'm about throwing parties, think you should come to my party. I really like that, and again, I think that, once again, you sort of going back to some of the themes we talked about earlier on the album, talking about, living a life of a partier and wondering if it's alright. And maybe this is her reflecting with herself, saying that, who should I be and who should I want myself to be? Because I feel like there's two people here and I'm not sure which is which. All that to say, I am putting this at number 3 on this album.
All right, cool. So I'm gonna add some context here because you didn't really address like the New Zealand elephant in the room. Actually.
Oh no, I know. I know she did the remix, but that's go on.
Okay. um, so, oh my goodness, I loved how I said the New Zealand elephant in the room. So yeah. So for those of you who are like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about, man? So this song is basically about Charlie's relationship with the artist Lord, and the quickest way that I can compare, like at least bring the comparison to light, is so you think not in this album whatsoever, but you think about like in Lord's discography, the song Team. The lyrics read, "I'm kind of over getting told to throw my hands up in the air, so there." And then you get in this track here, the lyric that you were hinting at, well, not hinting at, but saying, "Think you should come to my party and put your hands up." And you think about the comparisons; they're kind of like point for point, and I really did dig the lyrical aspect of it, where it's just like exploring that how it's hard. Again, both me and Matthew here, we're not girls. Let's face it, and we don't know about the how hard it is to be a girl, but the way that Charlie approaches the subject material about the dynamics of being a girl and exploring friendships and how people are different. I feel like she does it very well, and she doesn't give a very clear answer. She's just like, hey, I'm just me. I'm just here. I'm just doing my thing. And she's wanted to extend that, olive branch, or, to that person that's different from her. And I felt like that was a very nice touch. But going outside of the lyrical nature, I do dig this track a good bit instrumentally, especially how it opens up with the tingy kind of industrial girl, how that echoes. I felt like that was a really nice touch. And then you get that echoed in the chorus, where you get plenty of moments where the girl just feels like it's almost kind of out of place, which might be done purposefully because again, redundant statement here. I am not a girl. Matthew's not a girl, but sometimes being a girl can kind of feel like you're out of place, like you don't kind of belong. I felt like that was a very nice touch. And then the I felt like there was almost a moment where it could have been a whiplash with how in the verses you get the industrial, almost kind of vibe of how it was almost well, I don't know. I don't want to compare it to an artist like Death Grips, but it was a little bit more on the brash side, and then you get into the chorus, which is a little bit more on the lighter kind of side. I felt like the dynamics there, they worked out pretty well in terms of how you can compare the two and how it transitioned over. But yeah, overall, it's a very important song. It could have easily cracked my top three if it wasn't. I don't know. It just the song is what it is. It was just missing that little thing to kick it over. And maybe if I was a girl and could relate to this a little bit more, it could have cracked my top three. Not saying that you're a girl, Matthew, because this song isn't your top three. But yeah, I digress.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I think you did a very good job of describing, again, the good parts about this track and everything that's good with it. So yeah, it was definitely a standout for me.
So the next track is Apple, and yeah, in terms of just how this track is, it's an interesting track in terms of how I feel about it, because it's not on the upper highs of my real this is the cream of the crop of the album, but it's not in the tracks that I enjoy maybe a little bit less, but the tracks that definitely don't earn the distinction of being a least favorite for me. But harkening back to the idea of these tracks just get out of the way once they make their point, when I first, did my, listening of this on the detailed end, I just kind of got caught up in the flow of it, only to realize that the track ended, like, just kind of out of nowhere. I'm like, oh, okay, well, hold on, let me get my feelings about this track in order. But the way that this track is driven by that beat is just so infectious. And alongside with the beat, you get the offbeat hits that contrast so well with that four on the floor drum machine beat. I felt like that was a very, very nice touch. And like, there's several moments where that beat just morphs into a more melodic section. And like, side note, I really dug the breathy section that happens occasionally in this track here. And then after that, after it morphs into a more melodic section, the beat just gets brought back down into the main, like, focus of the track. And like, the only thing that I can say that lyrically that this track is talking about, it's more like I took away from it that this is more about, like, not wanting to succumb to, like, what your family has done, and, like, not being that apple that's, like, has fallen from the tree. Like, she talks about, like, wanting to throw that apple and wanting to go to the airport. And overall, not enough meat on the bone to, like, really take it over the edge. But this is a good track nonetheless.
I agree that the track sounds nice, and the beat of it just, does flow very well. But to me, this is kind of a nothing burger of a song, honestly. Because like you said, it makes its point and it gets out of the way. And at the same time, it feels like, because of the, sort of haphazardness of it, I don't really like the hook on this track so much. I mean, it's fine. But, it just, the airport. I have in my notes, is this song about an apple or an airport? Because I just think, I mean, I get what this track is, and I appreciate it for what it is, but all things considered, I have this as my second least favorite track on the album. And that's it for least favorite tracks. There are no other least favorites, so is this and Everything Is Romantic. Just because I felt and I think it's a relative nature too, because I think just compared to a lot of the other songs on this album, this one is so much sort of down there. It's not bad. Like, again, it fits on the album, and if I were to listen to it, I don't think I would skip it. But at the same time, I'm just thinking, yes, you. So
the Apple Airport song.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Maybe yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Like, the pivot from, like, talk about, like, apples and, like, hey, going to the airport, is a little bit rough, and maybe that's probably what's holding it back from, like, climbing up the ranks of the track hierarchy for me. But overall, like, this song is good enough on its own. I dug the flow, and I think I was just kind of caught up in, like, the feel of it, and, like, I was kind of dancing along to it in my head for it to, like, land any further than it has in my track rankings here. But that being said, ready to go back to back?
Yes, back to back. And this track, again, it feels the chorus reminded me a little bit of Apple in the fact that it just goes, back, 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 back. But the first half of this song is so good that I'm not even gonna question it as far as that. I mean, the lyrics are pretty minimalist, but at the same time, they get the point across right away, and it's in a very infectious way at that. The way it loops around, so it just doesn't really, like, stop flowing for the first, like, minute and a half, I thought was a really, really good way to go about it. And then when it kicks into the part where it's just back, 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 that kind of turned me off a little bit, but much like I said with the Girl So Confusing, that when it got back to the beat, it made more sense and contextualized everything to the point where everything was fine. So ultimately, I do like this track quite a bit. Not in my top 3, but definitely, I would say in the... I would probably put in the upper half of the album.
Yeah. I really can't add too much more to what you said about this track here because, again, there's not really much to it. I wouldn't call it a nothing burger, though, because just the overall groove of like how everything it flows throughout the repetition of back to back to back to back. It gets me lost in the rhythm of it and like the it's almost like a trance kind of song, if I'm going to be honest with you. And I will give this track a little bit of a it almost seems like it was I just want to say, like, it feels like it was almost like kind of like self-aware at a point where it had to switch up in the bridge where she's talking about like, took a long time breaking myself down, building myself up, repeating it, and like, you get that line, repeat it again in that bridge. Like it needed that just to like, change things up, because if it wasn't for that moment, this track could have easily been labeled as a nothing burger for me. But yeah, other than that, there's really nothing else to talk about this track. I mean, like, it's nice that like, I can enjoy a track like this where it's just, you can just put it on the background. Maybe you're running, maybe you're doing dishes, maybe you're mowing your cat. But like, it's a good enough track on its own, but again, not enough meat on the bone for it to like, land any higher up in the track placement for me here. So I feel like we're both ready to move on to Mean Girls. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. So, dude, I love this song.
Do you really?
Yeah. And so it's funny when I did my first like detailed listening of this track here. When this track landed on its chorus, I made this kind of face. I made like an oh yeah kind of face. I was just like, oh yeah, like get down with your bad self. And I was gonna be like, I was gonna make the face without actually giving any detailed descriptors of it, but I was just like, we're recording a podcast, like people need to like know what I'm actually doing. So but essentially here, there's two sections to this song. Like, you get the verses where you get that synth almost acting like a piano with like those random hits. You get the drum machine and little vocal samples that are morphed, and I felt like that was a very nice touch. And then you get the second section, that chorus where things get thick with 3 C's, with that industrial rave music feel, and I absolutely love it. And like, even lyrically, like like, this is basically kind of like Charli XCX's version of like, hey, here's to all the mean girls, like kind of like taking somewhat of an inspiration from Kanye West's Runaway, but not entirely, because like that track is more about like, hey, here's to all the assholes, and like like that almost seems like hey, this is who we are, and like we're kind of like, it almost seems like more like sad and empty in that way. But this track here, Mean Girls, is more about like, hey, here's to all the mean girls, let's get down with our bad selves. Like, because you get like lyrics where you get very descriptive images of said girls that are like being held up as examples of mean girls. And yeah, honestly, I love this song for it. It's a pretty simple song if you think about it, but it hits so hard. So we've arrived at my third favorite track on this album.
I completely respect that. It's not in my top 3, but pretty much you hit the nail right on the head. It's so descriptive about what it is. And again, I feel like this is another track that you could argue is self-reflective, whether this is Charli talking about herself and her party days. Because I mean, the way she talks about, here it is at 2 a.m. and you're doing this, and then at 4 a.m., you're playing with a gold cross across your neck, calling him daddy. And I'm just thinking, you're taking a drag of a long cigarette, and I've had a few nights. I don't smoke, but I've definitely had those nights where it feels like you're just sort of delirious after everything, and you kind of want the party to keep going, but you're not sure how. So I definitely like the vividness of this track is very strong with me. The beat's good too. I do like the chorus on this quite a bit. Again, not in my top three, but I think it's a great album track. And again, I do like the Kanye comparison because this definitely feels like as far as like tracks that are like, hey, where my girl's at, because there's been a dime a dozen with those over the last decade plus, but I feel like this is one of the very few that actually feels like it's a self-referential, self-loathing, but also self-celebrating type of weird mix of vibes. So I dug that part of it too.
All right. So the next track is I Think About It All the Time.
I Think About It All the Time, the penultimate track on the album. And once again, for the second song in a row, the levels of description on this song and the level of introspection are nuts. Like, this came very close to being in my top three. Because once again, you have a very nice solid beat. It's a bit more of a lighter track. It's not as heavy on the bass or the dance elements as much, but the lyrics make up for that so hard, because basically this is a song about how once again Charli is thinking about her fame, and specifically in this case the idea of being a mother. And she's thinking, will a baby or raising a kid change my life and bring it meaning that I'm not sure it has? Which again, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing that a dance track of all things, let alone a dance track from an artist that is very consciously pop, could be so self-conscious. Again, like, I don't see a world in where, like a Gaga or even a Beyonce could write a song that's not only this descriptive. I think they could do songs that are this descriptive, but I don't think they're at the point of their lives where they could say, they're still in that questioning phase of who they want to be. Like, they've established who they want to be. And I think what makes the beauty of this album so great is that Charli isn't sure what she wants to be, but she's sure that she wants to tell us about it. And it's that, we talk about the dividing line between stardom and superstardom, between wanting this and wanting that. This is that line, it feels like. It feels like we're walking in that gray area. So again, not in my top three by a very short decision, but I think the song is fantastic.
I absolutely agree, and I'm not going to really steal any of your thunder that you just threw down on the ground here and talking about, like, the the existential, like, crisis that Charli's describing in this specific track here. But I will just say, though, like, earlier on in the review, I talked about, like, how, like, there's plenty of moments here where if you scratch the surface of, like, some of the tracks here, that you really kind of can dig into, like, more of a, hey, other than like a, hey, let's party into, like, the, the windows break kind of, motif. And you don't even need to scratch the surface. Like, the surface is here. Like, this is a pretty deep song. And I love that Charli threw this on the record and made it kind of almost disguised as, like, a fun little, like, light song, but the moment you zero in on the lyrics, you're like, oh, okay, I know what she's talking about. But obviously didn't land in my top three, but I absolutely love this song because of the emotional rawness of it. That one moment I do want to kind of highlight that it was an interesting production choice, and I really caught this with my Sony earbuds. Not a sponsor, but the the like the way that Charli's vocals are mixed in the the verses here, or even the more emotional moments, it like the vocals are front and center, like for the first time throughout this whole album, that like you can hear distinctly that you you can really hear that the instrumentation's in the background, and Charlie's in the foreground, where you really just hear everything crystal clear. And even outside of that, the chorus is so simple, but I really like it. And I really dug that the how the production used the vocal samples that just keeps getting hit. That vocal sample in particular, it's a great touch. And overall, the production is so great here, and I love how A.G. Cook locks into a really great groove with the synths. Overall, though, enough meat on the bone for it to climb up into the higher tier. It's kind of funny that I mentioned so much about hey, there's a higher tier, but a lot of the tracks that I say, hey, they're in the higher tier, they're kind of in that same plane. So kind of like how I talked about with um, Lucinda Williams, Car Wheels on a Gravel Road, where there was a lot of tracks that landed in the good song bucket. Like, there's a lot of tracks here that are landing in the amazing song bucket, but there's only a couple that landed in the perfection song bucket. We've already talked about them for the most part. But yeah, overall, great track.
I agree. Great track, and yeah, I don't think there's really too much more that we can add to it. So, are you ready to close things out with 365?
I'm ready to close things out with 365. So, this track could have easily cracked into my top three, but the main reason why I didn't pump it over to the top three is the fact that it almost feels like too much of a conclusion track, as weird as that is for me to say, for it to stand on its own. Because the way that it really hit for me is that when I first got to it on my first detailed listening, I was just like, oh, yeah, this is really kind of harkening back to the opening track 360, where you kind of get the same kind of themes and groove, but you get more of a added layer of instrumentation, which kind of can speak to the fact of hey, you've been through this experience, let's bring them back home. And lyrically, not much here other than her embracing that club dance kind of feeling, hey, she wants to dance her own music, and she's really owning her crap. One lyric that I want to highlight is push my hair back, I look hot when I'm bumping that, no, I really don't stop when I'm bumping that, gonna jump when it drops, I'm bumping that. The phrase bump that is repeated so much through this track. I dug it though. And one moment that really took the track over the edge to being a no notes kind of track for me is that you get that overall feel that's very reminiscent of 360, where hey, I'm bumping that, bump that with that rave kind of feel, and then the track builds, and it builds, and it builds up into the point you get a full on EDM drop, where it just seems the party's up to the next level, and we're just gonna be brats until we die, man. And speaking about brats, I kind of the inclusion of hey, the word brat a couple times in this track. Overall, fantastic way for Charlie to end the album.
I'm right there with you, and pretty much everything you said is dead on. The only things I'll add is this. The way this song contradicts so heavily with I Think About It All the Time really stood out to me. Because basically, at the end of the day, you're right. This is a solid club banger, and the way she's talking about, doing keys and lines in the bathroom, obviously we know what that is. The devil's dandruff, as you will. And the fact that this comes right after she's talking about possibly wanting to settle down and have a kid, to go right back to this, it made me wonder is she openly noting this kind of lifestyle is like an addiction, because for it to be, cut itself so deeply in sharp contrast with the last track, it does kind of make you wonder, like, again, we talk about the ambiguity of who she wants to be. Like, this, again, just throws another layer on top of that. Musically, I think this track's all right. I did think that the bump on that was a teeny bit repetitive, but not enough to make me dislike it. On its own, it's, fine, but in the context of this album, it really adds another layer of depth that really pushes this to a really solid conclusion.
We did it, man.
We did it, man. We're brats now.
We are brats! So, yeah, what an interesting album. Like, again, at the start of this review, like, we talked about, like, how we both aren't really fans, or not, I don't want to say fans, but, like, this is definitely not in either of our wheelhouses. Like, we're not bumping dance music, EDM music, or, like, rave music. I mean, I might occasionally, like, explore an artist like that, but is it my home base? No. And I hope, like, everyone can kind of, that's been a fan of the show, and especially, like, you probably know what my home base is now. It's sad boy music. So I'm very much not in the Brat sphere, but, like, this was a very interesting album.
Oh, I agree, and it's definitely an album that I was kind of wondering how I would feel about it, again, because as we talked about at the top, the internet's busiest music nerd gave this a 10 out of 10. So who else would fall under that spell? But honestly, like, I think this album is fantastic because, like you said, it doesn't fall in the wheelhouse of either of our musical tastes, but I think there's a connectivity of it and a depth of it lyrically that is connecting.
So, my overall thoughts about the album, though. So, as much of it is a EDM and, like, rave kind of, like, album that we've talked about. I feel like that could even be a little bit short-sighted because, you get a lot of moments where you get raw emotion in tracks like I Think About It All the Time, Sympathy is a Knife, and even the dynamics of, like, Girl So Confusing. It's not a really, like, raw emotion kind of track, but it definitely explores the dynamics of, like, female relationships with one another, and even, like, how I talked about that track where, like, even in the instrumentals, like, you can kind of get the feel like it's confusing to be a girl. And, like, there's some fantastic bangers here. Like Mean Girls, Rewind. Love that. Sympathy is a Knife is a fantastic song for me. I love how the album begins with 360, only to be complemented with 365, and, like, with 360 you get, like, the lyrical themes of her being insecure and, like, being like, hey, yeah, I'm going out to the club, and, like, I can bump this and I want to listen to my stuff too. And then, like, in 365 you can kind of hear that she's gotten down with herself, like, she's embracing that confidence. So it's a very good album. I'm not going to give it a 10 out of 10, and it's not because this album's not for me, because, like, again, I think we both plainly said, like, this album's not for either of us. We're not brats, and we're not. We're two men in our 30s who are white and straight in America. And this is not the target demographic, but, like, I don't know. There was enough on this album here for me to walk away from it really enjoying it. Fantastic pop album, fantastic album in its own right. So I'm gonna give it a solid 9 out of 10.
So, listening to this album, I was reminded of something that I was told over a decade ago by one of my professors in college, a man that you probably know who I'm talking about, by the name of Dr. Paul Kilpatrick. He talked about how when it comes to growing up and understanding other types of things outside of your comfort zone, he was comparing, eating a solid, comforting food like a mac and cheese to something that you may not be into, like a steak. A steak takes a lot more preparation, a lot more intuitiveness. It's not something that you could just slap together real quick and feel comfort about it. And I felt that way kind of listening to this album, because again, not for me. It's not for me personally, but at the same time, for so long, dance music, particularly rave music, has sort of had this sort of connection with vapid nature, that it's vapid when it comes to lyrics, it's vapid, it's just sort of vibes all around, that doesn't need to have lyrical depth. With this album, Charli XCX is basically saying, no, you guys are wrong. This kind of music can have lyrical depth. It can have historical depth. It can have intuitiveness that it does not, that's been absent from this for so long. And for this to be released at a time where her star is about to burst, at a point where she's like, okay, it's either make it or break it, I think she's made it. So I can't quite give this a 10 out of 10 either, but I'm right there with you. I like this album, and it very much reminded me of another album I'm going to mention in a couple minutes, once you're done recommending your thing, that also made me realize that music that may not be for me does have some hidden gems. So I am also going to give this a 9 out of 10.
So that gives us an average score of 9 out of 10. Because
Math.
The easiest kind of math that we can ever do.
Right.
So I'm glad that, we both enjoyed it. I definitely probably won't be returning to the album anytime soon, because I've just played it so much that I think my ears are starting to hurt a little bit. But that's only because of just anytime that I replay something multiple times, it's just like my ears know, and it's just like, hey, can we just do something else? I'm getting this is the same thing. So the album that I'm gonna recommend is the only Charli XCX album that I have appreciated in the past, and I did do a re-listen of that specific album for this review here, just to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn and being like, I actually don't like this album, but I'm going to recommend it anyway. But no, I like it, and I would be, considering, maybe revisiting it a little bit more. It's the album that she released in the pandemic. It's called How I'm Feeling Right Now. Solid moments that are very comparable to Brat, and more lyrical themes about, isolation during the pandemic. Solid album. Easy recommendation for me.
My recommendation is going to be a little different. It is going to be an album that I was just talking about as far as the context of genres I'm not used to, providing something that I've become very used to and have become to appreciate very, very much. Because I was never into, the sad boy rapper era until a certain album came along that sort of shattered my expectations. And that's kind of how I felt listening on the second re-listen to Brat. And that album is Igor by Tyler, the Creator. Very much in the same wheelhouse of something that I did not think was for me, connecting me in a way that I was not expecting, but have since come to just love and appreciate every single way.
All right, cool. I absolutely love that album, man. It's a great album. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have, if you've experienced what it means to be a brat by Charli XCX, and are looking for another album to pivot off to, check out Igor by Tyler, the Creator. Or you can also check out the other Charli XCX album that I talked about, which is How I'm Feeling Right Now. All excellent albums. We easily recommend all three of them. Now that we know what it means to be a brat and how our feelings are about brats and how girls are just so confusing all the time, Matt, where are we going next in our musical journey? Because we've had quite a whiplash going from 1970s soulful funk with tracks like What Is Hip, and then to 2024 where we are talking how we're going to be bumping that until the windows break. Yeah, I'm curious to see what you got cooked up.
So we are taking another hard turn.
Yes!
We are going to head into the world of rock once again, and in particular, the two options you have in front of you this week are by bands that you and I have both seen live. We have both seen these bands live. In fact, we've both seen these bands in the same venue live. But I'm not going to tell you which bands. I'm not going to tell you which venue. All I'm going to tell you is your choices, which are the 2 years that the albums in question were released. So your option is going to be either 2014 or 2017.
Oh, jeez. Oh, man. I have no idea. Well, I have a slight idea what could be 2014, so I'm gonna pivot over to 2017 because I have no idea what that album is gonna be.
Okay, so the album from 2017 is an album by a band that we just saw several days ago. It is the album Hard Feelings by the band Future Teens.
Oh my goodness, man! I love that, man. Kind of took me out of surprise there, but yeah, I'm really excited to talk about that band. They were really good live.
Oh yeah, they were phenomenal live, and we'll talk about that more next time out. But yeah, usually whenever a band does so well that may make me buy the CD, it's worth talking about. But we'll get into that next week.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you've not listened to Hard Feelings by Future Teens, make sure that you listen to that. That way, you're familiar with the album before next week's episode. That way, you know what me and Matt are talking about. Or, I mean, hey, if you just like listening to us talk about like random stuff, cool. I mean, we're here for you. We'll provide episodes every week, as long as if we keep this gravy train rolling. But yeah, at least do yourself a favor, check out the album. It's by a great group, Future Teens, and the album is Hard Feelings. So, do you have anything else to say about this album this review as a whole, Future Teens, before we send it on out?
Not really. Again, I'm glad you suggested listening to Brat. It's definitely one that I might consider getting a physical copy of, just because again it's a solid album that, again, to me, really knocks out narratives of what dance music is and can be, and I'm kind of hoping that future pop artists sort of go in that direction.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you've liked this episode of Hey, Listen to This, and let's face it, I mean, if you've reached this point in the episode, you like what you hear, you like what we brought to the table, the best way you can support me and Matt right now, currently on our podcasting journey, is on that platform that you are currently listening to us on. Make sure that you give us a positive rating, and make sure that you just stay up to date with the episodes. Subscribe, follow, whatever the action is that you need to do to make sure that you constantly get updates about our episodes. If you're listening to this on the YouTubes, make sure that, like every YouTuber is going to say, like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below of how you thought about the episode and the album as a whole. And if you're curious about the social media links, they're in the episode description down below. And if you want to do an episode recommendation, you can reach us at ttheylisten@gmail.com. And for the last time in this episode, that is featuring two men who share the same middle name, that are talking about what it means to be a brat, as expressed by Charli XCX. I'm the one, the only, the undisputed Ryan James Kearns.
And I'm the one, the only, the undisputed Brat, Matthew James Durzik.
And, man, this was such a cool review, and I'm kind of sad that it's over. But you know what?
What?
Sometimes I think it would be really cool to rewind. Now we So, I got a confession, though. How I come up with, these clever ways to, introduce the episode?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Just sometimes I get some, fears inside that, I might say something stupid.
Well, hopefully you won't have to talk about too many stupid things today.